Man, I love this question. Thank you so much for asking it, Christian. Thank you. Christian is a sound gospel preacher, young, sound in the faith, not playing around with the Lord's body, with truth. All right. There are members of the Lord's church who believe that worship songs with mechanical instruments are okay to listen to because they are outside of the church building, valid or not. So, number one, there's no such thing as Christian worship music with instruments. This is because it's not Christian, by definition, not following Christ, to use instruments to worship God. Colossians 3:16, sing, teach, admonish. Colossians 3:17, whatever we do has to be authorized by Jesus. Instruments for Christian worship are not authorized. People don't do it because Jesus told them to. They do it despite the fact that Jesus didn't tell them to. That's a whole nother subject for the uninitiated here. Christian knows what the information I just shared. He teaches that exact same information. Worship must be by the authority of Jesus. We have to worship in spirit and in truth, John 4:23 and 24, and we can't transgress the commandments of God or else our worship is in vain, Matthew 15:3, 8, and 9. All right, so the question is, hey, can we listen to vain worship outside of worship? See what I did there? So is it okay for us to listen to other people worship in vain? What? Yeah, so it's not. It's a great question. It's a great teaching question, Christian. Thank you for it. So there's a principle that's found in the end of Romans 1, verse 32. And the principle, the context is sexual sin. However, there's a principle that applies across the board. And that principle is giving hearty approval to the sin of other people is sin. The ones that practice this, again, the context is sexual sin. However, the principle is universal. People who practice this particular sin are worthy of death, not only the ones that practice it, but the ones who give hearty approval to the sin of other people. So I have to ask, for those people who think it's okay to listen to other people try and fail to worship God, how is that entertaining? Like, that's got to be the purpose of it. You're just being entertained. You're being entertained by people who are trying and failing to worship God. How is that anything other than just excruciatingly heartbreaking? Like, these people we know, they've given their lives to, they think they've given their lives to God, but they do things the way they want and the way their pastor tells them rather than the way Jesus said. And it's heartbreaking. It's awful. Now, ask those people who have gone into a studio, recording studio, and they've recorded these supposedly Christian worship songs. Ask them if they're worshiping. Oh, yeah, they all say, oh, yeah, this is worship. Yeah, they'll gladly say it's worship. Now, I'll insert this here. If it's not, then they're taking the name of the Lord in vain. So it's vain either way. Either they're worshiping in vain because they're worshiping God in a way that he doesn't approve of, meaning it's in vain, it doesn't work. Like, I have an illustration that I use. If you run your car out of gas, so you've got a gas-powered car. If you have a gas-powered car, you run it out of gas all the way out. I mean all the way out. And you go out to start it. You put the key in the ignition and you crank it over. It will be in vain that you're cranking it, meaning it's not going to fire. It's not going to work. You're trying to do something that's not going to result in the engine running. It's just not going to work. Well, if we worship God the way we want rather than the way he says, it's not going to work, meaning he's not going to accept our worship. We don't get to determine what he will accept for worship. He does. So these people are going into a studio. They're recording supposedly Christian worship music. It's not Christian to worship God with instruments. And then it's in vain, so it doesn't work. How? Before I even get to the end result of this, how could that possibly be entertaining? Like, why would it make you happy, and why would you find it enjoyable to watch other people, to listen to other people sin? Those people are sinning. They're giving God worship that is in vain because they're not doing what he said to do. They're doing what they want to do. What the Catholics started doing in the 7th century, what the Protestants started doing in the 1800s, It's just what people want to do rather than what God says. They're trying and failing to worship God. That should not be entertaining. That should only be heartbreaking. It's awful. Now, these people are trying to and failing to worship God. It's not Christian. And if they're not, it's vain either way. Either they're worshiping him in vain or they're taking the name of the Lord in vain because they're not worshiping, but they're singing Jesus or they're singing about God. So that would be taking his name in vain. There's more to it. Imagine that. Imagine there was a weekly television show that was centered around watching people offer vain worship in the form of the Lord's Supper. Say people perverted it in some way. Transubstantiation, for instance. It's really the body and blood. Let's say that was a TV show, and every week you watched people offer vain worship. Like, how could that possibly be entertaining? Yeah, it's not. It should not entertain us. It shouldn't give us any pleasure to watch people try and fail or to listen to people try and fail to worship God. So there's no such thing as, people. A lot of times people will phrase this differently. Oh, but it's okay because it's outside of worship. There's no such thing as outside of worship. No, I'm not saying all of life is worship, because it's not. Abraham said, hey, take the donkey. I'm taking a donkey and I'm going to go over there and worship, and then I'm going to come back to you. I don't have the book, chapter, verse on that. I totally should. Let me get it. Genesis 22:5. So all of life is not worship. So instead, worship is an avenue, a way that God allows us to reach him with our worship. He says, go this way. If we go the way he says, then we get to reach him. So there's no such thing as outside of worship. When those people have recorded themselves, they've recorded themselves worshiping, and they recorded themselves worshiping in vain. If they've used instruments, they've recorded themselves worshiping in vain. How is that entertaining? How is that possibly good? Here's another angle that people, even Christians, probably hadn't thought of. What do you think the chances are that somebody who doesn't get worship right gets the rest of the doctrine of Christ right? Yeah, that's sketchy. You're going to listen to people try and worship God in vain. They're going to try and worship God, but it's in vain, so it doesn't reach God. And then those people, they've tried and failed to worship God because they didn't do it the way he said. And if they can't even get worship right, what's the chances they got the rest of this right? They didn't get the rest of this right. And the purpose of singing is teaching. Sing, teach, admonish. These hymns that we're singing, they're for teaching. That's the purpose of them. Glorifying God, worshiping God, and teaching. That's the purpose. It's a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of our lips, Hebrews 13:15, and it's teaching. That's both from Colossians 3:16 and Ephesians 5:19. So what are the chances that those vain worshipers who are part of denominations are getting it right? The teaching, they're not getting it right. They're going to be slipping in Calvinism. You might catch 5 of them, and you'll miss number 6 and 7. Well, it's 5 errors, and it's okay to listen to that error and over and over. It's okay to listen to that error over and over again, isn't it? No, it's not. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. Ephesians 5:11. So there's just so many ways it's not good. Christian, thank you for an awesome teaching question that you asked. That's awesome. It's going to help everybody who hears this. I mean, the Christians anyway. Yeah. Offering vain worship is not okay, and neither is deriving pleasure from other people offering vain worship. Instead, we should have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. They're going to get the doctrine of Christ wrong if they can't even get worship right. So we don't need to have anything to do with that. It should make us sad for people to try and fail to worship God. Thank you, Christian. Love you, brother.